He had never imagined that a routine assignment could completely change the course of his life. Working as a human logistics specialist, he had spent most of his career handling projects in familiar environments, cities filled with human colleagues, familiar food, and predictable routines. Yet here he was, standing in front of a transport shuttle that would carry him thousands of light years away to a world he barely knew existed. The planet was called Vulpine, a place dominated by fox-like humanoid species known as Vulpines. He had read a few reports on the society and culture, but nothing truly prepared him for the reality of being sent there. As part of his housing project, the shuttle landed smoothly. Its soft vibrations, a constant reminder that he was now far from home. Stepping off, he was immediately struck by the beauty of the world around him. The sky was a brilliant shade of orange, tinted with hues of purple, and two suns hovered lazily above, casting long shadows over rolling hills. The architecture was unlike anything he had seen before, buildings shaped like twisting vines and towering spires, with windows that glowed gently from within. Everything had an organic, almost living quality, as if the planet itself had grown its cities from the ground rather than building them. As he moved toward his assigned housing block, he felt the weight of the assignment press down on him. He was not supposed to live here permanently. His task was simple: manage the installation of new housing units for Vulpines relocating within the sector, then return to his usual assignments on human colonies. Somehow, due to a clerical error, or perhaps a miscommunication between human and Vulpine authorities, he had been assigned to permanent residency. There was no way to reverse it immediately. He had to accept the housing and live among the natives. His building was a small, semi-detached unit tucked between two larger structures. The walls were smooth, almost silky in texture, with colors shifting subtly from gold to amber, depending on the light. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, expecting silence. Instead, he noticed something unusual: tiny sensors hidden in the corners, little devices that seemed out of place. He shrugged, assuming they were part of the Vulpine housing system. Still, he could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. The first few hours were awkward. He unpacked his minimal belongings, arranging his clothes and equipment with methodical precision. Every sound, the soft hum of the building's life systems, the faint creaking of the floors, the distant chatter of neighbors, felt amplified in the quiet of the evening. When he looked out the window, he noticed movement across the courtyard, 3 figures standing at a distance, seemingly observing the new arrival. They were foxwomen, humanoid yet distinctly Vulpine. Their ears were pointed, tails flicked occasionally, and their movements were careful, deliberate. Their eyes, large and expressive, seemed fixed on him. He quickly looked away, trying not to appear nervous. It's probably nothing, he told himself. But over the next few days, the same pattern continued. Every time he stepped outside for exercise or to inspect the area, he would catch glimpses of the same 3 foxwomen, always keeping a careful distance, always watching. Sometimes, when he thought he was alone in the corridor, he would sense movement out of the corner of his eye, only to turn and find no one there. It was subtle, unnerving, and entirely foreign to him. During the first week, he attempted small interactions to test the boundaries. When he met one of the women near the central water fountain, he offered a polite nod and a smile. She returned it cautiously, her tail flicking behind her, before retreating to a shadowed corner. Another time, he tried to engage in conversation when delivering a small package to a nearby unit. The foxwoman at the door asked polite questions, her tone measured and careful. Yet when he looked back, he noticed the other 2 observing from a distance. No matter what he did, he could not escape their attention. He began to consider the reasons for their behavior. Was he being evaluated? Were they responsible for ensuring his safety or monitoring him for compliance with local regulations? He had read about Vulpine social systems, highly structured, community-oriented, and protective of outsiders. Perhaps this was a cultural expectation rather than something personal. Still, the intensity of their observation unsettled him. Even mundane actions, like watering the small plants outside his unit or arranging his kitchen utensils, seemed to draw attention. Sleep offered little respite. The soft, golden light from the twin suns lingered long into the night, and his dreams were restless. He imagined scenarios in which the three foxwomen followed him into every corner of the building, whispering among themselves in a language he could not understand. He woke multiple times, heart racing, only to find the apartment silent and empty. Yet the sensation of being watched lingered. Almost tangible, by the end of the first week, he realized that simple avoidance would not work. He could not ignore the presence of the foxwomen, and he could not hide. Instead, he began observing them as carefully as they observed him. One had silver fur with streaks of white, appearing meticulous and analytical. She often checked schedules posted in communal areas. Another had russet-colored fur, moving with a quiet confidence, occasionally glancing directly at him before looking away. The third was smaller, younger, with dark, almost black fur. She rarely spoke, but seemed the most interested, her eyes following him constantly. Curiosity replaced some of his initial unease. Who were they? Why had they been assigned to watch him? He reminded himself to stay cautious, to respect boundaries, but a part of him felt drawn into the mystery. The routine of observation began to structure his days. He would notice them while doing chores, working on the housing assignments, or simply taking in the scenery. Each encounter was brief, yet meaningful, each glance carrying unspoken questions. Then came the first official interaction. A small, rectangular device appeared outside his door, a message from the building's management system. It was addressed to him personally, welcoming him to the community and providing guidelines for proper integration. The note mentioned that 3 local residents had been assigned to assist him. That explanation was clear, formal, yet oddly unsettling. The assistant seemed more like supervision. He read the message several times, trying to suppress the anxiety it brought. Despite the uncertainty, he recognized the importance of adapting. He forced himself to treat the situation with normalcy. He greeted the foxwomen when necessary, followed building protocols meticulously, and focused on the housing project he had been sent to oversee. Slowly, he began noticing subtler signs of personality in each of them, small gestures, facial expressions, and fleeting moments of humor. Each observation felt like peeling back a layer of mystery, giving him insight into a culture so alien, yet oddly familiar. By the end of the second week, he found himself balancing a strange mixture of discomfort and fascination. Life on Vulpine was beautiful and challenging, structured yet full of subtle social rules he had yet to master. And while the presence of the 3 foxwomen had started as a source of unease, he could not deny the growing sense that they were an inevitable part of this new life observer's guides, and perhaps something more he had yet to understand. It was in these early days that he first realized a truth it would carry throughout his time on Vulpine. Being alone on an alien world was not simply a matter of physical survival. It was a matter of understanding, patience, and learning to navigate the complex, watchful eyes of those around him. Every action, every glance, every word could carry meaning. And in this delicate balance, he was learning not only about the Vulpines, but also about himself, how a solitary human could adapt, survive, and maybe even thrive in a world that seemed designed to observe, challenge, and transform him. The first week on Vulpine had been filled with cautious observation and quiet adjustment. But by the second week, the reality of living among the foxwomen became impossible to ignore. Every time he stepped outside his unit, he felt their eyes on him, subtle but persistent. At first, he had tried to convince himself that they were only curious, that their attention was harmless. But as days passed, he realized that their watching was far more deliberate than mere curiosity. Every movement he made, every task he performed, seemed to be scrutinized. He noticed patterns in their behavior. The silver-furred woman, tall, composed, and precise, always appeared near the communal information boards. She would stand there, almost motionless, scanning the schedules, occasionally glancing at him to see how he reacted. The russet-furred one, with a calm, graceful presence, seemed to shadow his steps subtly. If he went to the supply depot or took a walk through the courtyard, she was there, sometimes pretending to check something else, sometimes simply pausing in his line of sight. The smallest one, dark-furred and almost silent, was the hardest to read. She didn't interact much, but her eyes followed him constantly. tracking him in a way that was impossible to ignore. At first, he felt uncomfortable, even anxious. Being watched so closely was unfamiliar and unnerving. Even when he tried to go about his daily tasks quietly, he sensed that his every action was noted. Watering the plants outside his unit, cleaning the small kitchen, arranging his minimal belongings, all of it seemed to draw their attention. Sometimes he caught one of them looking, and he felt an instinctive urge to freeze or hide. As though caught in a game he didn't understand, to cope, he began keeping track of their movements, almost like a mental journal. He noted where they were, how often they appeared, and what their focus seemed to be. This observation gave him a sense of control over the situation, allowing him to feel less anxious. He realized that each of the three women had distinct habits. The silver one was methodical, the russet one fluid and adaptive, and the dark one quiet and almost unreadable. Understanding their behavior became an unexpected daily challenge, one that slowly replaced fear with curiosity. Despite the unease, he tried small interactions, cautious experiments to test their responses. One morning, as he watered the flowers outside his unit, he nodded politely toward the silver-furred woman who was observing from a short distance. She returned the gesture with the faintest incline of her head, then returned her attention to the boards. Encouraged by this small success, he attempted another approach a few days later, leaving a tray of fresh fruits near the courtyard fountain. The russet-furred woman approached, hesitated, and then selected one piece carefully. Their eyes met briefly, and for the first time, he thought he saw a flicker of acknowledgement, almost like approval. However, not every interaction went smoothly. One afternoon, while carrying a package to the supply room, he accidentally dropped it near the dark-furred woman. She immediately picked it up, her eyes scanning him with what felt like silent judgment. The moment was brief, but it left him unsettled. He realized that living among the foxwomen meant more than completing tasks. It required understanding unspoken rules, observing subtle cues, and adjusting behavior carefully. Any misstep, however small, might draw more attention, or worse, disapproval. He also began noticing how the foxwomen interacted with each other. They rarely spoke in his presence, but subtle gestures, tail flicks, glances, shifts in stanza suggested a silent communication he could not yet understand. They seemed to coordinate almost instinctively, ensuring that at least one of them was watching him at all times. Sometimes he thought he noticed them exchanging small items or nodding toward each other after observing him. It was as if they were quietly assessing him, determining how he fit into their world. The intensity of their attention began to affect his daily life in unexpected ways. Even simple acts like walking to the community kitchen or inspecting his apartment for maintenance became performances. He moved more deliberately, aware that someone was almost certainly observing. Meals, which had once been solitary and routine, became opportunities for subtle interactions. He would pass the courtyard and see the russet-furred woman arranging flowers in a small garden, and they would exchange polite nods, their eyes briefly meeting. Small gestures like these became a language of their own, silent communication that conveyed awareness and re-acknowledgement without words. Sleep remained restless. Nights were filled with the soft hum of the building's life systems and the distant calls of native creatures outside. Even in darkness, he sensed their presence nearby. Sometimes he thought he glimpsed shadows moving past his windows, only to realize it was his imagination, or perhaps it was not. He began leaving small tokens outside his door, simple acts of courtesy, like tidying the courtyard area or leaving water for plants. These gestures were small, almost invisible. Yet he noticed subtle reactions: a tail flick, a glance, a brief pause in movement. The presence of the foxwomen shifted from purely observational to something more interactive. By the middle of the second week, he began to understand a crucial truth. The watching was not hostile. It was cautious, deliberate, and strangely protective. The three foxwomen were not trying to intimidate him. They were ensuring he understood the rhythms, norms, and expectations of their world. Every glance, every subtle gesture was part of a larger pattern, a structured system of guidance and oversight. It was a culture unfamiliar to him, but slowly he he realized it was designed to help him adapt. Even if it felt overwhelming at first, he started experimenting with small social gestures to see how they responded. He would smile when passing, wave when crossing paths in the courtyard, or leave small arrangements of objects in communal spaces. The reactions were subtle but noticeable. The silver-furred woman would pause and tilt her head slightly. The russet-furred one would adjust her posture, almost as if acknowledging his presence without approaching. The dark-furred woman remained quiet but observant, her eyes following him with unbroken focus. With each interaction, he began to learn the rhythms of Vulpine life. Daily routines, communal activities, and silent protocols revealed a highly organized society that valued harmony and attentiveness. The foxwomen's observation was less a restriction and more an immersive lesson. By paying attention to their reactions, he could gauge whether his behavior aligned with cultural expectations. It was a subtle, unspoken form of communication, one that required patience, awareness, and sensitivity. At times, the experience was exhausting. Constant observation made him self-conscious, even fatigued. But at the same time, it sparked a growing curiosity. He wanted to understand these individuals, their habits, preferences, and personalities. Who were they outside their role as observers? How did they perceive him, and what did their subtle actions mean? Each day became a small adventure in interpretation, observation, adaptation. He also noticed that the foxwomen were not uniform in their approaches. Each brought a different style to their observation. The silver one was meticulous, almost scientific in her scrutiny, noting small details about his routines. The russet one was more relational, watching for his comfort and engagement within the community. The dark one, while silent and reserved, seemed to notice things that others might overlook, capturing nuances in expression, gesture, and behavior. Together, they formed a trio that provided comprehensive, though quiet, guidance. By the end of the second week, he had begun to feel a strange sense of connection, even though interactions remained limited. The presence of the three foxwomen, once intimidating, had become part of the fabric of his life. They influenced his behavior, shaped his routines, and subtly guided him in ways he was only beginning to understand. What had started as a source of anxiety now seemed like an opportunity for learning, a chance to adapt to a culture far different from his own while discovering his own capacity for awareness, patience, and engagement. The most important realization he discovered was that life on Vulpine required constant mindfulness. Every glance, gesture, and movement carried meaning. The foxwomen's watching was not merely surveillance, it was interaction, education, and subtle care. Their attention, once intrusive, had transformed into a framework through which he could understand and navigate his new environment. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to look forward to their presence, to the small signs that indicated acknowledgement, understanding, and connection. By the end of the second week, he was no longer merely a passive observer in this world. He had begun participating, responding, and learning. He understood that living here required more than completing tasks. It required attunement, awareness, and respect. And as he settled into this rhythm, he realized something profound. On Vulpine, being watched was not a threat. It was the first step toward belonging. By the third week, he had adjusted to the rhythm of life on Vulpine, though the constant attention of the three foxwomen never ceased. He had moved beyond the initial discomfort and had started interpreting their subtle gestures, small nods, and careful glances. Even so, a nagging question remained in his mind. Why were they really watching him so closely? Was it merely a cultural expectation, or was there something more specific about him that had drawn their attention? One morning, as he carried tools to the courtyard for minor repairs in his unit, he noticed something unusual. The silver-furred woman was talking to a small group of neighbors, pointing subtly in his direction. Though he could not hear the conversation, the motion suggested coordination, a shared understanding of some kind. Later that day, the russet-furred woman approached him directly for the first time. She carried a small device in her hands and spoke in careful, measured words. Her voice soft but clear. "Excuse me," she said. "You are aware that living here requires some guidance. We are assigned to assist you." He blinked, slightly startled. "Assist me?" he repeated. I wasn't aware of anything official." She nodded, her eyes calm yet firm. "Your presence is unusual. Human residents are rare. The community wants to ensure your adjustment is smooth. Our role is to observe and help in whatever ways are necessary. Please understand it is not a matter of mistrust, but of responsibility." The explanation was both relieving and confusing. He had sensed observation, but he had not known it was part of a structured system. The foxwomen were not merely curious, they were assigned to ensure his integration into their society. Their attention was part of a formal process, designed to maintain harmony in a world that was cautious about outsiders. Over the next few days, he began to understand the scope of their task. Observation was not the only responsibility. Guidance was equally important. The silver-furred woman focused on rules, schedules, and community protocols. She showed him how to navigate local systems, from waste disposal to energy usage, explaining why certain procedures were non-negotiable. The russet-furred woman focused on social integration, demonstrating how to interact politely with neighbors, when to offer help, and how to respond to inquiries. The dark-furred woman remained mostly silent but present, her attention capturing details he would not have noticed otherwise, the subtle shifts in tone, the way others reacted to him, and even the smallest mistakes he made. It became clear that the three foxwomen worked as a team, each covering different aspects of his life. Their methods were subtle and efficient. They rarely corrected him openly, preferring to demonstrate or leave clues that allowed him to adjust his behavior independently. At first, he felt overwhelmed. Constant attention, guidance, and subtle corrections were exhausting. Every small error, whether in routine or etiquette, was quietly noted, and he could feel their eyes tracking him as he made adjustments. Yet, with time, he began to appreciate their approach. It was not intrusive in a harsh sense. It was carefully measured, allowing him to learn without embarrassment. For example, one afternoon he mistakenly placed a recycling container in the wrong location. The silver-furred woman quietly moved it to the correct spot, giving him a slight nod, but saying nothing. The action itself taught him more than a reprimand could. Similarly, when he misused a communal device, the russet-furred woman demonstrated its proper use with patience, her movements deliberate and easy to follow. The dark-furred woman simply observed, her presence reinforcing his awareness and encouraging attentiveness. The more he learned, the more he realized how structured and intentional Vulpine society was. Outsiders were not merely tolerated. They were carefully integrated, observed, and guided. The foxwomen's assignment was not punishment or suspicion, it was protection and mentorship. A system designed to prevent misunderstanding and ensure smooth coexistence. Understanding this changed his perspective. Watching that had once felt intrusive now seemed thoughtful and considerate. A framework that allowed him to navigate a culture vastly different from his own. As he spent more time with them, subtle personal traits began to emerge. The silver-furred woman, who had seemed cold and analytical at first, displayed flashes of humor and warmth in private moments. She occasionally allowed herself a small smile when he successfully completed a task or adapted to a local custom. The russet-furred woman was openly empathetic, her guidance marked by genuine concern for his comfort and well-being. Even the dark-furred woman revealed small quirks, like humming softly while observing or offering brief gestures of encouragement. These glimpses hinted at their individuality, reminding him that they were not merely functionaries, but real beings with their own personalities and experiences. Communication, though limited, began to deepen. They still used formal tones in public, but in private, he learned more about their lives. He discovered that the silver-furred woman had experienced training young Vulpines in community responsibilities. The russet-furred woman had once been a cultural ambassador. The dark-furred woman had spent years adapting to new neighborhoods herself. Each brought unique expertise to the role, creating a system of guidance tailored to his needs. One evening, as the twin suns set and the sky glowed orange and purple, he sat in the courtyard, reflecting on his experiences. The foxwomen approached together, carrying simple refreshments. They offered them silently, a gesture of hospitality that transcended words. He accepted, grateful, and the moment became a small milestone in his understanding. For the first time, he felt that their presence was not an imposition but a bridge, a way to connect and adapt to this alien world. The realization came slowly. The constant observation was a form of trust, not control. They were entrusted with his well-being, and by extension, the harmony of the neighborhood. Their actions, carefully measured and intentional, were designed to help him succeed. They watched not to dominate but to guide, not to intimidate but to protect. Each subtle glance, every careful gesture, carried purpose, teaching him lessons he had yet to articulate. By the end of the third week, he began to adapt confidently. Tasks that once seemed overwhelming, like navigating communal areas or interacting with neighbors, became manageable. He responded to guidance proactively, anticipating corrections before they were needed. Observation no longer felt like surveillance. It was collaboration, a partnership in understanding, learning, and living. The foxwomen, in turn, seemed to respond positively to his progress. Our glances became less intense, their gestures more relaxed. The silver-furred woman allowed more autonomy in tasks. The russet-furred woman engaged in brief conversations, beyond instructions, and the dark-furred woman showed subtle signs of approval, such as a nod or a tail flick. The dynamics shifted from structured observation to tentative, mutual understanding. This transformation marked a turning point. The three foxwomen were no longer mysterious overseers. They were teachers, mentors, and guides. His perception of Vulpine evolved as well, from a foreign, intimidating world to a structured society capable of accommodating outsiders thoughtfully. Life here was challenging, yes, but it was also fair, deliberate, and in its own way kind. Even as he continued to adapt, questions remained. Why had he been chosen for this assignment specifically? Was it mere chance? Or was there something unique about him that had drawn the foxwomen's focus? These questions lingered, forming a quiet undercurrent to his daily life. Yet, he accepted that some answers would come gradually, over weeks, months, or even longer. Patience, observation, and attentiveness, principles he had learned from the foxwomen themselves, became central to his experience. By the end of the third week, he had achieved something significant: understanding. Not complete mastery, but a foundational awareness of the dynamics, expectations, and subtleties of life on Vulpine. The constant watching, once a source of stress and anxiety, had transformed into a guiding presence, offering him insight, structure, and gradually trust. What had begun as a confusing, intimidating experience now held the promise of learning, adaptation, and even connection. In the quiet moments he reflected on the lessons learned. Patience was essential. Observation was key, and trust could be built in small, careful steps. The foxwomen were no longer simply observers. They were participants in his growth, shaping his understanding and easing his integration into a world that had once seemed overwhelming. And in that process, he realized something profound. Being watched, when done with intention and care, could be the first step toward belonging. Life on Vulpine had become routine, but a different kind of challenge was beginning to emerge. The initial phase of observation and guided instruction had shifted. What once felt like constant scrutiny was evolving into something more complex, something he had not anticipated. The three foxwomen, who had been assigned to monitor and guide him, now seemed to step beyond the strict boundaries of duty. Their interactions were more personal, more attentive, and at times filled with subtle warmth. It was confusing, yet strangely comforting. And he realized he had begun forming a bond with them that went beyond protocol. At first, he noticed small changes. The silver-furred woman, who had always been precise and almost rigid in her guidance, began offering gentle advice rather than formal corrections. If he made a mistake while organizing supplies or completing a minor repair, she would demonstrate the correct method with patience, allowing him time to adjust without feeling pressured. Sometimes she would linger a little longer than necessary, explaining why a particular procedure mattered and occasionally sharing a small, personal anecdote from her own experiences. Her demeanor had softened, revealing the care beneath the strict exterior. The russet-furred woman became more engaged in casual conversation. While she had once spoken only in formal, measured tones, she now asked about his thoughts, his preferences, and even his feelings about living on Vulpine. She offered guidance in a way that was empathetic, responding to both his words and his body language. During one afternoon in the courtyard, she showed him how to tend a communal garden, explaining not just the tasks, but the reasoning behind them. Her approach made him feel included, not just observed. Each interaction built a growing sense of trust and comfort. The dark-furred woman remained the most enigmatic, yet even her behavior began to shift. She had always been quiet and observant, rarely speaking, but he noticed subtle changes in her attention. She would offer a small nod of encouragement when he completed a task correctly, or a brief, approving flick of her tail. On one occasion, he caught her smiling an almost imperceptible gesture, but one that filled him with an unexpected warmth. It became clear that her silence was not indifference. It was careful attention, a form of communication that he had only recently begun to interpret. Their collective behavior had begun to change the way he experienced daily life. He was no longer merely performing tasks under supervision. He was participating in a dynamic relationship built on observation, guidance, and mutual understanding. Simple routines, like cooking meals or cleaning his apartment, became moments of interaction. He found himself paying closer attention to their subtle cues, responding in ways that encouraged positive reactions. Their presence, once a source of anxiety, had become a stabilizing force, giving him structure and confidence in an otherwise unfamiliar environment. One day, as he prepared a small meal, the silver-furred woman joined him in the kitchen area. She observed quietly at first, then spoke softly. "You are learning quickly," she said, her voice carrying genuine approval. Most newcomers struggle with these routines for weeks. Her words felt different from previous instructions. They were encouraging rather than corrective, a recognition of progress rather than a statement of rules. He smiled, realizing that their watching had transformed into support, and that their attention was now part of a shared journey, rather than a one-sided evaluation. Evenings were the most revealing. The courtyard, bathed in the glow of the twin suns as they set, became a space for subtle interaction. The russet-furred woman would often invite him to sit nearby while she arranged small flower beds or checked communal devices. They exchanged words about simple matters, from weather patterns to minor maintenance needs. But beneath the surface, a sense of connection was growing. He noticed that she seemed genuinely interested in his comfort, offering advice on how to navigate local customs, but also asking questions about his life before Vulpine. These conversations, small and unassuming, deepened his understanding of both their culture and the individuals themselves. The shift was not instantaneous, but gradual and steady. Over time, the foxwoman's attention became less about monitoring and more about collaboration. They began to include him in decisions about communal areas, asking his opinion on minor adjustments and allowing him to participate in tasks that were once strictly their domain. The silver-furred woman invited him to help reorganize a small library of community resources, explaining the purpose behind each arrangement. The russet-furred woman asked him to assist with minor ceremonies, teaching him the rituals and their significance. Even the dark-furred woman, while still quiet, offered small tasks that allowed him to feel useful and valued. These interactions transformed his sense of place on Vulpine. No longer an outsider merely under observation, he began to feel a tentative sense of belonging. The foxwomen were no longer authority figures in the strict sense. They had become partners, guides, and, in subtle ways, friends. Their careful attention had evolved into genuine care, creating an environment in which he could learn, grow, and participate fully. Each small gesture, whether a nod of approval, a shared task, or a quiet conversation, reinforced the sense that he was no longer simply a resident underwatch, but a part of the community. With this evolving dynamic came moments of reflection. He began to consider the complexities of trust and connection in a culture so different from his own. The fox women had been assigned to watch him, yet they had done so with patience, respect, and care. Their guidance had been subtle, never overbearing, allowing him to adapt at his own pace. Through their attentiveness, he had learned the value of observation, empathy, and patience, not just as survival skills, but as tools for meaningful interaction. One particularly memorable evening, the three foxwomen gathered near the central fountain, a neutral space where he often spent quiet moments. They spoke among themselves for a short time, then turned toward him. The silver-furred woman spoke first, her tone calm yet warm. "You have adapted well. We have observed your progress and are pleased with your efforts." The russet-furred woman added, "Your attention to detail and willingness to learn are appreciated." Finally, the dark-furred woman offered a simple nod and a brief, almost imperceptible smile. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Their attention, once a source of tension, had become a symbol of recognition and trust. From that evening onward, interactions became more natural. Guidance was still present, but it was integrated into daily life rather than imposed as a formal structure. He began to anticipate their advice, incorporating it into his routines and learning through experience. The foxwomen, in turn, seemed to respond with subtle satisfaction, their gestures and glances communicating approval without the need for words. The relationship had shifted from duty to trust, from observation to collaboration. This transformation affected not only his practical life, but also his emotional state. He felt more confident, more aware of his surroundings, and more connected to the community. The anxiety that had once accompanied every glance or gesture had largely dissipated, replaced by curiosity, engagement, and a sense of partnership. The foxwomen were no longer distant figures whose purpose was to monitor him. They were companions, offering guidance, encouragement, and in their own ways, friendship. He also began to understand that their attentiveness was not limited to tasks or rules. It extended to his well-being, comfort, and even enjoyment of life on Vulpina. They noticed when he struggled with fatigue or frustration, offering subtle gestures of support. They observed his reactions to new experiences, sharing small insights or adjustments to help him feel more at home. Their guidance had evolved from instruction to mentorship, their observation from scrutiny to care. By the end of this phase, he realized a fundamental truth about living on Vulpina. Connection, trust, and understanding were as important as rules and routines. The foxwomen had guided him not only through practical challenges, but also through the subtler aspects of social and emotional adaptation. They had taught him to observe, respond, and engage in ways that respected both his own needs and the culture of the community. For the first time, he felt that his life on Vulpina was not merely about survival or adaptation. It was about participation, learning, and forming meaningful relationships. The three foxwomen, once mysterious and intimidating observers, had become integral to his experience, shaping his understanding and providing the support necessary to navigate an unfamiliar world. What had started as a strict system of oversight had blossomed into a dynamic of trust, care, and mutual respect. He understood now that the line between duty and personal connection could be subtle yet powerful. Their initial roles had been defined by obligation, but the relationships that emerged were defined by choice, empathy, and understanding. Observation had become guidance, guidance had become mentorship, and mentorship had become trust. And in this evolving dynamic, he found not only comfort and confidence, but also a deep sense of belonging, a feeling that he could thrive in a world that had once seemed so foreign and challenging. Life on Vulpina had grown increasingly familiar, yet the days remained filled with small discoveries and quiet surprises. By now, he had fully settled into the rhythm of the community, guided by the attentive presence of the three foxwomen. What had begun as constant observation had evolved into a balanced system of trust, guidance, and connection. Yet, even with the challenges behind him, he realized that the final stage of this experience, the true sense of belonging, was just beginning. The mornings started with routine tasks, but they now carried a sense of purpose. He would check his unit, maintain equipment, and prepare meals, knowing that the foxwomen were nearby, not as overseers, but as supportive companions. The silver-furred woman often offered tips on efficiency or organization, helping him refine small habits without commanding attention. The russet-furred woman focused on social interactions, encouraging him to engage politely with neighbors, join communal activities, and contribute to group tasks. The dark-furred woman, once silent and enigmatic, provided subtle signals that guided him through unspoken rules. Her presence, a constant reminder of care and attention. Despite the routines, life remained unpredictable. One afternoon, a minor problem arose in the communal energy system. A panel had malfunctioned, causing a temporary disruption in the building's power. While he worked to fix the issue, the foxwomen were immediately present, offering guidance and assistance. The silver-furred woman directed him toward the necessary controls, explaining the technical aspects calmly. The russet-furred woman coordinated communications with neighbors, ensuring that everyone remained safe and informed. The dark-furred woman observed closely, pointing out small details he might have overlooked. Together, they formed a seamless team, transforming what could have been a stressful situation into an opportunity for collaboration and mutual learning. Through these experiences, he realized that his connection with them had deepened beyond simple guidance. Their attention, once formal and structured, had become personal and considerate. They shared moments of quiet humor, brief conversations about past experiences, and even small, thoughtful gestures, like leaving a favorite snack or adjusting a workspace for comfort. These interactions, subtle as they were, conveyed a sense of inclusion and trust that he had not expected when first assigned to Vulpine. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of deep purple and orange, he sat in the courtyard reflecting on his journey. The foxwomen approached together, carrying a small tray of refreshments. They sat nearby, offering simple smiles and nods. There was no formal instruction, no oversight, only a shared moment of presence and acknowledgement. In that quiet space, he felt the culmination of weeks of adjustment, observation, and guidance, a sense of belonging that extended beyond rules or routines. It was in these moments that he began to understand the true purpose of their presence. The silver-furred woman, through meticulous guidance, had taught him the importance of structure and attention to detail. The russet-furred woman, through empathetic interaction, had shown him how to engage with others and form meaningful connections. The dark-furred woman, through quiet observation, had taught him patience, awareness, and the value of subtle communication. Together, they had not only guided him, but had shaped the way he experienced life on Vulpine, transforming it from a strange and foreign place into a world he could understand and navigate with confidence. As days passed, he became increasingly involved in the community. He participated in local projects, assisted with communal gardens, and helped organize small events. The foxwomen were present, but now less as supervisors and more as partners. Their presence was a source of reassurance rather than pressure, a network of support that allowed him to engage fully and confidently. He noticed neighbors responding positively as well, acknowledging his efforts and welcoming his participation. The sense of isolation he had felt during the first days was gone, replaced by a feeling of inclusion and mutual respect. Small traditions began to take on personal meaning. He learned the significance of daily rituals. From tending the courtyard plants to assisting with the arrangement of communal areas, the foxwomen shared stories and explanations, helping him understand not only the procedures but also the values and intentions behind them. He began to appreciate the depth of Vulpine culture, the attention to harmony, the careful balance between individual responsibility and communal well-being, and the respect for both personal and shared spaces. Over time, the three foxwomen became more than guides. They became companions and friends. The silver-furred woman shared her experiences of training young Vulpines, occasionally inviting him to assist in small teaching tasks. The russet-furred woman involved him in cultural activities, showing him how to participate respectfully while enjoying the experience. The dark-furred woman, still quiet but attentive, offered subtle encouragement and validation, her presence a steadying influence in moments of uncertainty. Through these interactions, He realized that the initial observation and monitoring had laid the foundation for genuine connection and trust. One afternoon, he found himself reflecting on how much he had changed since arriving. Tasks that once seemed overwhelming or unfamiliar were now manageable, even routine. He could anticipate community expectations, navigate social interactions with confidence, and contribute meaningfully to shared projects. The lessons learned from the Fox women had extended beyond practical skills. They had taught him patience, empathy, and the importance of attentiveness. These were qualities that would serve him not only on Vulpine, but in any future challenges he might face. The culmination of this experience came unexpectedly. During a community gathering, the leaders of the neighborhood formally acknowledged his efforts. They spoke of his contributions, his adaptability, and his willingness to learn from the Fox women's guidance. When the three women were recognized alongside him for their roles in mentoring and supporting him, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Their work had not only ensured his successful integration, but had fostered a lasting connection that extended beyond duty. In private moments, the relationships grew even deeper. The silver-furred woman occasionally shared personal stories, revealing humor, wisdom, and resilience from her own life. The russet-furred woman expressed concern and care, asking about his comfort, his thoughts, and his experiences. Even the dark-furred woman, through small gestures and quiet attention, communicated trust and respect. Together, they had transformed from observers, keen, into partners in his life on Vulpine. He realized that belonging was not something that could be assigned or forced. It was built through attention, care, and shared experience. The Fox women had started as guides and mentors, but over time they had become integral to his daily life. Their presence provided stability, their guidance offered learning, and their subtle gestures conveyed understanding and inclusion. What had begun as an assignment fraught with uncertainty had evolved into a community and relationships that were meaningful and supportive. By the final weeks of his initial assignment, he had achieved a sense of comfort and confidence he had never imagined. The constant watching that had once made him uneasy was now reassuring. He could anticipate guidance, participate in communal activities, and engage with neighbors with ease. The Fox women, once mysterious and intimidating, had become allies, friends, and teachers. Their efforts had transformed his experience from one of apprehension and isolation into one of inclusion, growth, and connection. He often reflected on the lessons learned. Patience, empathy, and attentiveness had been essential in navigating life on Vulpine. The Fox women had shown that observation, when combined with care and guidance, could create trust and foster meaningful relationships. They had demonstrated that belonging was built not through enforcement or control, but through support, understanding, and shared experience. Through their mentorship, he had discovered not only the culture of Vulpine, but also a deeper understanding of his own capacity for adaptation and connection. In the final days, he moved through his routines with a sense of ease. Simple acts like tending the garden, preparing meals, or interacting with neighbors were no longer sources of stress, but opportunities for engagement and connection. The Fox women were present, their gestures gentle and supportive rather than formal or imposing. Each small action, from a nod of approval to a shared smile, reinforced the bonds that had developed over weeks of observation, guidance, and collaboration. As he prepared to reflect on the conclusion of his first weeks on Vulpine, he realized that the experience had profoundly changed him. The Fox women had started as overseers, guiding him through unfamiliar territory. They had become companions, mentors, and friends, shaping not only his practical understanding of life on the planet, but also his emotional adaptation and sense of belonging. What had begun as an assignment under scrutiny had blossomed into genuine connection, mutual respect, and lasting trust in the end. He understood that home was not merely a place assigned to him. It was a space created through interaction, guidance, and shared experience. The three Fox women, once observers, had become a part of that home, shaping it with their care, attention, and support.